whether, wherever the debate's at, I think it's hard to argue that social media isn't a big factor in our young people not doing well.
Yeah, I think overall, if we step back and look at social media, the net negative is overwhelming.
Aaron, I have a question for you. Anytime I start the podcast that way, I can just feel the growing level of anxiety and tension.
I hope you feel the tension.
I do feel the tension, but I just want to know, do the kids think they're all right?
Our kids?
The kids.
The kids. The kids of this nation.
Well, it could be our kids and the kids of this nation. And that's actually the question we want to deal with today. It's actually the title of a Substack article. So we've mentioned a name on this podcast before, Jonathan Haidt. It's Haidt, Jonathan Haidt. And that's a name we think parents should be familiar with, particularly a lot of his work, his research on social media, mental health of teens, some of his stuff on overprotection. Mm-hmm. In fact, here's I think a very important book, The Coddling of the American Mind, subtitled How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. Really good book. Parents should read this, particularly those parents out there who struggle with overprotecting their kids. Really should read this book. You may be well-intentioned, but good intentions are not enough. You need good ideas as well. Anyway, he's got a Substack, and it's entitled labeled or titled After Babel, and which is interesting because Haidt is not religious. He's an atheist, but I think he's an ally on a lot of things, but it's a biblical reference. So the article's entitled, Do the Kids Think They're All Right? It's hard to find members of Gen Z who think their phone-based childhoods benefited them. What's your reaction to the title alone?
Well, it got our attention, obviously, but actually, as not only the title, but as we kept reading, I think it's consistent what you and I have experienced with the young people that we work with at Maven. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't surprise me, the title, that Generation Z actually does have the ability, when they're given the chance to reflect. At least that it's been the case for us and the case for Jonathan Haidt as well, that they do have the ability to reflect and step back a little bit and see how technology has affected them in a different way than probably as they observe us older generations.
Yeah. If you think about it, and I think this is an important part for parents to consider and leaders, those of us trying to influence young people, this is a big social experiment. Like social media, smartphones, this technological revolution is a big experiment. It's not like we have 50 years of data. No, we developed these tools and then we just started putting them in the hands of everybody. And then we started putting them in the hands of our kids, and now everyone's got them. I was just speaking in the Philadelphia area. Well, actually, you and I were speaking in the Philadelphia area last weekend at a Worldview conference there. But they had me teach at a chapel that afternoon, and I just surveyed the kids. It was middle school through high school. How many of you have smartphones? And virtually every one of those, probably 200 kids or so. Every one of them. I mean, maybe one or two exceptions. But so we're kind of experimenting on this. It's a big social experiment. We should be thinking carefully about it all along this process. Or maybe I guess it should cause us to be cautious, but we're not seeing that caution exercised by parents in particular, who are just handing over phones and then giving access to social media kind of uninhibited.
Yeah, parents are the ones who get to decide about the technology with their kids. Now,
wait, are you saying the kids don't get to make those decisions on their own?
No, as we know, parents pay for them. They pay for the monthly subscriptions of the phones. They pay for the phones themselves, and then
What
they,
is that?
they
How
give
is that
them
relevant?
to the kids. So,
I'm just thinking of
and I know
an entitled young person. How is that relevant?
I know some parents would say that obviously technology has seeped into all areas. So even if they're wanting to control it in a certain way, the school now, like with our oldest daughter, we experienced this in school. Like the higher up in school she got, this idea of like giving kids an iPad or a laptop, and that became normal. That happened with her. Now she's a millennial. And so we experienced this like, oh no, everyone has to have this laptop or iPad or whatever it was. And we weren't really given that choice. So that I understand those situations. And we also know you go to restaurants or airports or anywhere and there's screens everywhere. Mm-hmm. But as far as kids having their own phone and all of this, parents, we really are in control of this. But it does seem like most parents feel like they don't have a lot of control in this area, or just think, well, you just got to do this.
Yeah, there's a bit of a sense as we talk to parents of kind of a helplessness in a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
Right? They're not literally helpless, but helpless in terms of the cultural pressure and the social pressure and maybe the dissatisfaction their kids going to express, and plus then they have all the kind of the cultural allies out there, all their friends, everyone, everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay. So all of that to say, we've got to think carefully about this. Jonathan Haidt is doing that, and so we're not going to read through all of this because it's like 27 pages. So we're going to help sort through it all so that you listening do not have to read through it all. But there's a lot of important stuff in here.
But we will link to it because I think some of you listening may want to read it all or print it out and read it with a group of other parents.
Yeah, give it to your friends.
Yeah.
Your pastor.
So we will link to it because we do think it's important.
And educators should really be aware of this stuff as well. I think... Yeah, even with educators are not at the mercy of the ideas and values of young people. Mm-hmm. Like, imagine a school that did not allow any smartphones on their campus. In fact, if anybody knows of a school like that out there, maybe reach out and let us know. I'm curious, is there a single school in the U.S. that does not allow phones on campus? I imagine there's not a single one. But
well, okay, so there's that school we were just in Pennsylvania. That school we were at, their policy, remember, was no phones. You can't use your phone at school. Mm-hmm. So it had to stay in their backpack or their locker.
Right.
And if they're caught with it, then they get detention.
Yeah. No, and that's...
But do you mean something even more more than that?
I am getting extreme here, Aaron. I am on the radical fringe. No, I'm saying, is there a school that doesn't even let the kids bring the phones to the campus? Because we know that, you keep it in your locker, you keep it in your backpack. There's even a rule, it can't be brought out at all during the school day. We know what kids do and what they're going to do, and they're gonna sneak it in various ways.
Yeah.
So anyway,
actually, okay. And I'm thinking about one of the administrators that we were talking to at that school, and the most complaints they get about things like that is from parents.
Yeah.
So the complaints.
Wait, pause. We need a dramatic pause here. Did you hear that, parents? In fact, our youth pastor at our old church would say the same thing.
Yeah, actually, we've heard this several times that when a youth group or a school or a co-op or wherever the kids are going and gathering, that when someone tries to implement let's have some boundaries with the phones, the people who they heard the most complaints from was parents. Not they, of course, students complain, but the biggest pushback was from parents who want their kids to have their phones on them so they can get a hold of them at any time.
Yeah, in case something happens.
In case something happens. But you think about how frustrating that is for a school or whatever that's trying to create a different type of culture and help the kids in all kinds of ways to focus, to be present, all the things that come with not having distractions. And the people that they fight against the most on this is actually the parents.
So it's not just about the kids, is it? It's about you parents corrupting a generation of young people. All right, or enabling them. I don't want to be that harsh. You're not necessarily corrupting them. You're enabling their corruption.
We're in this group you're criticizing.
I stand above the group. I transcend it.
Right.
No, so all of that to say, we got to think carefully about this. Jonathan Haidt is thinking carefully about this. In this Substack article, Aaron, trivia. Do you know what a Substack is? I'm just thinking there's probably quite a few people who are technological rookies who might not know what Substack is. I'll tell you what, Google it, okay? Google it. But anyway, basically, a venue for Jonathan to get his thoughts out there, write kind of long-form essays, not necessarily a blog. It's a more substantial piece than, I guess, your typical blog. Anyway, so he starts us off by saying that he's received common criticism of his work since 2015 is that I am misunderstanding the younger generation. I'm just another in a long line of older people lamenting the behavior of kids these days, right? And so to his credit, he wants legitimate feedback and criticism. And so he, trying to get it, though, has been a little bit difficult. He says, when I speak to high school and college audiences, I usually ask those who think I got the story wrong, meaning the story about, his assessment of the kids, Gen Z, to raise their hands and then come forward and ask their first questions. I rarely get a hand raised or a critical question. Okay, so what he ends up doing is so
he's asking for challenges, but he rarely gets those in a live audience.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what he's saying there. So he has a couple of research assistants who are younger. He has them weigh in, say, hey, help me get feedback from your generation. And so they look at some different studies, okay? We're not going to wade through all of them. Let's just highlight some. They look first at quantitative studies. And so these are kind of larger studies where more survey-oriented, right? And so a 2018 study, 4,000 Australian youth from 12 to 25. They found, they reported that 62% of those youth believe that the mental health of young people is declining, as opposed to 23% who say it's improving. So more, like almost 3 times as many say mental health is declining. And then a plurality, 37%, blame social media. That was the number one thing in terms of the reason given. The next thing was it was 17%. It was expectations from family, school, and community. So, all right, so one study here dealing with mental health of young people, and they're saying it's declining. And the biggest factor they're pointing to is social media, okay? A 2017 study in the UK, 1,500 teenagers, and they had them kind of do a score about different social media platforms. Okay. And I'll just read a little summary here. The aggregated scores revealed that users had on net negative opinions of the effects that highly social apps like Instagram and Snapchat were having on their mental well being. Both Instagram and Snapchat were said by teens to worsen anxiety, depression, loneliness, sleep, body image, bullying, and FOMO, which for you old folks is fear of missing out. Okay. It is also evident that even if the average young Instagram user has an overall negative opinion of the health-related effects, they see many parts of their experience as beneficial. Self-expression, emotional support, and community building have positive average scores for both Instagram and Snapchat. All right. And then they reference a Pew study, which says this: other surveys further complicate the picture. Right? What's the complication? In a 2022 Pew study that surveyed 13 to 17-year-old American teenagers, respondents reported perceiving valuable opportunities to receive emotional support and express themselves on social media websites, which for many outweigh the negative social pressures they feel. Okay, so kind of in the quantitative studies, what they're pointing to in this Substack article is there's kind of two things going on. Teens reporting that mental health is not doing well amongst their peers, amongst them and their peers in Gen Z. And they link it to social media. And at the same time, they say, well, social media gives us a lot of value, right? We connect, there's online community, they get emotional support. And so that's what they're talking about here with this kind of complicated picture.
So to me, which translates to, we see that there's negative things to this, but we like it.
Well, do you okay, so my question would be, is that fair? Is that a fair assessment of it? But we like it. Because they could be saying, hey, we see the negative impact. We also see the positives that we're getting from it.
Sure.
You know?
But so I guess in summing it up that way, to me, as I've read that, listened to young people, and I don't mean we like it like it's just this little thing that we like to do. Mm-hmm. It's like we enjoy this thing, and so we know there's negatives to it, but for us, we like it so much that it's worth the risk of all these other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the two things, so to clarify, the two things that they, in that Pew survey, that they highlight here is that they receive emotional support, right, from whatever online community, and they express themselves on the social. So that's what they're, at least in the Pew study, that's what they're looking at as the positives. And so that, therefore, that's what causes them to like it or think it has value.
Which the emotional support part is, I mean, that's tricky, right? Because what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Because do they see that as, oh, I get to see people and connect with them, or I'm having a bad day, I post about it, and then people say, oh, love you, it's okay, tomorrow, and that's what they see as emotional support, because it doesn't jive with then their responses to the negative effects, because the negative effects are depression, anxiety, isolation, all these things that are the opposite of connecting with other people.
Yeah.
And so, and in the article, I don't know if you're going to bring it up, or maybe you're about to bring it up.
Well,
their self-assessment is sometimes different than their assessment of everybody else.
Yes. And that's, I think, very interesting. It's a really good point to highlight here. And so at the end of this section 1, the author, who's one of the researchers, Jonathan Haidt, it's his Substack, but he's, it's his whatever research assistants, writes this. These studies suggest 3 conclusions. Number 1, A large number of young people believe that social media is having a negative impact on the mental health of their cohort. They come to this conclusion more often when invited to consider their peers' experiences instead of their own.
Mm-hmm.
That, I think, speaks to our own ability to deceive ourselves, to not be honest with ourselves. Right?
Yeah, so, it's like when we hear a sermon at church, and
like the sermon you heard yesterday,
instead of thinking of ourselves, it's so much easier to be like, oh gosh, Brett needs to work on that so bad. Like
is
the
that
pastor's
really what goes on
describing
in your mind
Brett.
When you hear the pastor. Well, I was the pastor. I was the one preaching yesterday at church.
Okay, everyone knows what I mean. It's easier to assess the other people than it is to, of course, and that makes sense.
I know who needs to hear this message.
Yes. So in that way, it's like, okay, well, we relate to the young people in this survey because it's like, oh yeah, of course, you can see in your friends the things that you might have a blind spot for yourself, which is remove the plank in your own eye before the speck in someone else's, because we see everyone else's specks really good.
Yeah.
And we can oftentimes miss the plank in our eye. So that makes sense in light of knowing human nature.
Yeah. And so there may be a little bit of kind of bracketing off their own assessment of themselves. But then when they assess one another, and maybe they're able to be a little more objective and honest at that point, and you get this picture emerging that they're saying, yeah, when I look at my peers, it's having a negative impact on mental health.
And that to me is, it's so important for us as parents and anyone who's leading the next generation to read these things and to understand their mindset when it comes to it, because I read this stuff, I think about it, you read the books, and Jonathan Haidt always is like following him on Twitter is good because he's always pointing to studies and stuff. And so knowing this stuff is important because for me, it helps me to have compassion, to understand the generation, and then to realize they need our help because obviously the younger you are, the harder it is to see things about yourself. This is something as we mature and grow, we start to recognize our own fallenness more and more. But it's so obvious to me that they're when they have these honest moments of reflection, which we've had with students too, these kinds of conversations, they are aware of the negative effects, but it's hard for them because they enjoy social media, or it's just so much a part of their life that they need. This is where I think if we're honest, they need our help in navigating it.
They need our leadership.
Yeah.
This is where we as adults and parents and leaders really have to step up. And despite the protests of young people, despite the tantrums that you might get, leading with what we take to be the wise and best course of action. So that takes some courage.
Yeah, because what we're asking young people to do is to have self-control. It's to know that, oh, this isn't good.
Wait, isn't that what you just said? That's impossible, right? By definition.
No, it's a habit.
A teenager is by definition uncontrolled or lacking in self-control.
No, you don't believe that. So self-control is a habit that is developed over time, and it can be developed in little ways, little decisions we make, and then that helps us in the big areas that we need to exhibit self-control. And so this is why when they're young, we start to teach them how to have self-control in little ways, and then it gets bigger as they get older. If they have a hard time with self-control, which what young person doesn't, and this is a human problem, this is where, as parents and leaders, we help them along. We show them it is possible to have self-control, but it takes time, and we're here to help you navigate this and to set up healthy boundaries with something like a phone or social media or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So number 2, right? Here's a second conclusion. The platform's negative effects on teenagers' body image, sleep patterns, FOMO, fear of missing out, and overall level of anxiety are key reasons that young users see the platforms as harmful. All right, that's I think insightful there for us as parents and leaders. Is okay. What is the negative impact? Well, number 1, body image. Well, how is that? Well, because what gets put up on the screen is staging the world for them, as Neil Postman says in Amusing Ourselves to Death, right? It's staging the world. And so, so here's the ideal female body type, or here's the male ideal body type. And so they're going to see that, and they're going to see thousands upon thousands upon thousands of images of that being promoted and displayed. And this is the norm. This is what you should shoot for. And so according to the culture, this is the picture beauty, right? And so then I compare myself to that. And so body image is a big one. And this is one reason Jonathan Haidt talks about how really since 2011, 2012, 2013, there's this kind of skyrocketing of mental health trouble with young people, and it affects the girls, or the stats with the girls have increased much more than the boys even. It's increased with both, but more so with the girls.
Yeah.
And he talks about just the nature of social media and how girls are wired and why that might be the case. Body image would be a big one.
Yeah. And staging the world, what you're talking about, the images that we see on social media and websites and whatever, they're oftentimes filtered. So there's a filter on them. So it's staging
when
the
we post
world.
This podcast, we make sure there's lots of filters going on to show, that we're younger and more vibrant than we really are.
I don't think we do that.
Oh, I thought we did.
But
I just look this good naturally.
You think about this false picture. So it's staging the world and it's actually a false world. And then we're supposed to live up to that, what's not even real. Now, when I was in high school and there was no social media, we got that through TV and movies and magazines.
Yeah.
But now with social media, you take what I experienced with TV, movies, and magazines and what I thought was the perfect female body or look or hair or whatever it was. And now you times it by like 1 million because now they have these screens on them all the time. So it's this constant flow of images and messages of you need to look this way.
Yeah, that's where we've talked about in the past, technology is not neutral. So if you think about what you just described there, the switch from a television screen, a magazine, to now a smartphone technology, well, what's the difference? Well, the TV, you didn't carry that around with you watching it, right? You couldn't do that. It had to be plugged into the wall. A magazine, you could carry, that was more mobile. You could carry that around. But certainly it doesn't, the visual
It wasn't following me everywhere.
Yeah. And it wasn't updating regularly, right? So that's where this smartphone kind of overcomes both of those. It goes with you anywhere you want. It follows you around. It goes with you. It's portable. And it's constantly updating. It's not like you look through the magazine once, you're like, okay, I saw that. No, now everyone is posting it at all different times. So technology is not neutral. It's nudging us, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so body image, sleep patterns. And the idea here that we've seen in the research is that social media and smartphones can interrupt sleep. Why? Because young people get in bed with their phones and they're scrolling through stuff, and they might be addicted to those things, and then they're on it for, late into the night.
Well, yeah, you lose track of time. Also, the studies have talked about even the light that comes from the phone and how that affects our eyes, and it doesn't help our brains and our minds to rest, which is something we have to do before we can go to sleep.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's all kinds of research on that.
And so a lack of sleep, you're not getting enough rest is going to have an impact on your mental health.
Yeah.
Fear of missing out. Like, what are my friends doing? Oh, what are other people are doing? Oh, it looks like people are having fun. They're having good times. They're eating good food. They're going on vacations. They're in groups all of the time because that's when they post, or that's what they post. So that all that, helps us to understand how how social media platforms can contribute to negative mental health. And then the third conclusion. A significant number of young users think that social media helps them participate in a social community, express themselves, and receive emotional support. Okay, so that's the kind of the mixed picture. You got the qualitative studies. And the qualitative studies just refer to kind of studies that are more interview-based, where they're getting answers and then those answers are being analyzed, but you're kind of going a little more in-depth, right? Qualitative. And what they found was kind of the same thing. And it was, they talk about how they're, the interviewees, these students or young people, weighing the value versus the kind of the risks or the negatives. But it was interesting, some of the quotes from these particular studies. And I thought this one was interesting because this talks about how young people are conflicted on this, right? Some girls expressed that the continuous stream of perfect pictures on social media leaves them feeling insecure and jealous. Some try to counter those feelings by, for example, following accounts that revolve around body positivity, such as Feminist, an activist Instagram account that promotes body positivity. One girl, 15, disclosed, quote, "Feminist, that's something I follow and that makes me less insecure." Another girl, 15, even decided to only follow accounts from people who look like me so that she would keep feeling good about herself. Right? So there you go. The mixed bag. Why young people are still drawn to it, even though they're recognizing, hey, this makes me feel insecure and jealous. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it helps me not to feel insecure. And so you've got this mixed bag, which is, and let me just pause. This is important for us, I think, in terms of having conversations, particularly with our teenagers, is to understand underneath with a lot of our kids, whether, when you're trying to set limits on the phone or social media, or you're, saying, hey, let's take a break, understand what's going to go on. And so trying to figure out, maybe think of it as kind of peeling the onion a little bit, right? Surface level, they're going to say, no, I don't want to give this thing up. There's going to be a tantrum or a fight, and at the same time, maybe asking them, probing them a little bit more, get past that initial reaction, saying, hey, do you think this has a negative impact on you at all? What might be that? What might that be? And does it make you feel, when you look at those images, do you ever feel, more insecure, right? And just trying to, as we navigate this with our kids, understanding what's going on, I think will help us to be a little more effective.
Yeah, I think hearing that, how they talk kind of out of both sides of their mouth, and which just means they're conflicted on it, can help in the conversations that we have. And I'm thinking about a conversation that we had with some students at a worldview camp, and they were forced to take a break from their phones, and we were eating lunch with them. And so I didn't realize they didn't have their phone, or that they had been taken away. So they were telling me about that. And I said, oh, okay, so how are you guys feeling about it? And they said, oh, we hate it. And I said, okay, so tell me, why you hate it. Oh, we just think, it's kind of a dumb thing. We'll put our phones away when we don't need them, but we can't talk to our parents. We can't, they're giving me all these reasons they should have their phone. But then as I kept asking questions, this is exactly what they said was, well, it has actually been good because we stayed up really late last night talking and going kind of deeper on this topic and this topic that they were hearing about at the Worldview camp. And so there was this conflict even within them. And so then, I was able to kind of say, even though you hate it, I guess there are some benefits to it. And they were like, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Okay, so in the kind of qualitative literature section, here was a kind of highlight. It said the fulfillment of online self-expression, right, which a lot of Gen Zers view that as a value and a positive, right? So the fulfillment of online self-expression can quickly turn into self-policing when users are aware that they are being watched and judged. And this is a quote. It said, although self-expression was reported as hugely positive, there was constant fear of judgment and strict adherence to virtual norms to protect against this. In addition, the expectation to share was a heavy burden. So that nudge to, well, I gotta share, I gotta self-display. Some would prefer to keep their lives private and only accept close friends on their profiles, but fear judgment from others regarding numbers of online friends. So you just see the kind of the trap of social media and why that might mess with a young person's mental health. There was a common sense media study. This is kind of section 3. They examined American girls aged 11 to 15 about their experiences on social media. And again, the study also found, quoting here, the study also found that people who had strong opinions about platform features were more likely to be depressed. That was true even if their strong opinions were positive. So that's, I think, interesting if you're following along on that. So the kind of the stronger they express their opinions about platform features, like, hey, what was positive, what was negative, like location sharing, whatever it might be. Well, if they had stronger opinions about it, it correlated with them being more depressed, which can maybe communicate or kind of demonstrates the potential to, when you're addicted and you're just more invested in that thing, you're going to actually defend that thing more.
Yeah.
Or you're going to see it in a less objective, rational way.
Yeah, that's just defensiveness, right? If the ones who have the stronger opinions are more likely to be depressed, then that of course makes sense because they're defensive they're going to defend it. And yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that it points to they probably have a more serious problem.
Yeah, this is where, again, we have to get underneath. Got to get underneath in these and this is where having deeper conversations with our kids on this, our teen, particularly our teens, middle schoolers, high schoolers, we're going to have to do the hard work of getting underneath. Okay, more stuff. These were some interesting quotes from students in this particular study. Again, despite the ambivalent data on platform features, the study included quotes from many girls who struggle with logging off and have ideas for improving apps. They talk about the opportunity cost of time spent on addictive apps. Okay, just so I'm trying to set that up, like, hey, these are quotes from the girls. I felt the app wasted my time, and it just made me more predisposed to get sucked into my phone, Snapchat, TikTok, for prolonged periods of time. So even recognizing, like, getting more addicted to this. I watched 1 or 2 videos, and they took over my algorithm with really depressing and anxiety videos. So yeah, you watch one or two videos, and then what's being suggested now? Here come more videos like that because the social media app is trying to keep you on there. I was being bullied by other kids at my school who made accounts about ugly people and posted about me being ugly and doing cringy things. Which this is where I think we need to understand there's a whole online world that many of us as adults aren't even aware of.
Yeah.
That kids are making accounts to post about their peers or their other people at school to shame them, to make the, talk about them as ugly or this was cringe or whatever. I mean, talk about that.
That's a whole nother side of bullying that for those of us who didn't grow up with phones at school, like you said, we wouldn't even think about this or the possibilities of what can be done because we haven't lived through it.
Yeah. And I'm kind of at a loss of words because I'm thinking of the gravity of that kind of thing. So now there's these online worlds separate from any kind of adult supervision that kids are creating. They're private, but they're still accessed. And helping a kid navigate that where there is no kind of adult wisdom in there.
It's as if posters are being put up of them at school that say you're ugly, and they can't get away from the posters.
They can't tear that.
They can't tear it down. There's nothing they can do.
The
and you think of
they
how
would feel.
helpless. Yeah.
All right. And here was another one. I had unrealistic ideas of what I should look like and how my life should be. And these are just some of the confessions of girls regarding social media.
Yeah, okay. I was in the comment about the time, how it wastes their time or pulls them in to, and I'm connecting that with one of the other comments that you read that one of the teenage girls had said about how they think about what they post, what they should post. They think about who should I friend, who should I not friend. And that's one thing that you can't track about time on social media is how much time we think about it, even when we're not on the device or the social media. So we're not on Instagram, but how much of our time or our young people's time is spent thinking about, should I post this? What should I say about this if I post it? And the amount of time they spend thinking about what's going on in these worlds that you can't track on their phone. Like, all of our phones log how much time we spend on the social media apps. And this is to your point about it nudging us, and it's not neutral. It's nudging us even when we're not on it. And that's, of course, something that's been talked about a lot, that you can't even track the amount of time these things are taking from young people, even if you can track them on their phones. You're not in their mind, so you don't even know how much time they're spending thinking, should I post about this today? Where could I go and take a picture today to post about that?
Yeah, and it's not just nudging them to spend more time on these devices, it's nudging them on how to think about themselves, how to view the world around them.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jonathan Haidt ended up trying to get feedback online as well. They kind of multiple ways they were trying to get feedback, and so he did a Twitter post and also they emailed people trying to get feedback, and they didn't get a ton. So this wouldn't kind of be a official study, but they didn't receive a ton of responses, but they got enough that they were able. They when it came to Gen Z, they said they basically got two kind of responses in terms of this question: are the kids, doing all right? There were those that argued that Gen Z is doing just fine, and then those who don't think that Gen Z is doing fine. And it was, more than 4 times the amount said that they weren't doing just fine. So overall, Gen Zers themselves were saying we're not doing just fine. Now, what is the reason for that is, there's some debate there. And so whether is it social media? And I know in Jonathan Haidt's work and research, he's saying that 2012 or that 2011 through 2013 period is right about the time when smartphones kind of in social media becomes more ubiquitous. It's like kind of everywhere. And so, and he's doing more work to show this is not just correlation, it's causation. And so that we certainly, whether, wherever the debate's at, I think it's hard to argue that social media isn't a big factor in our young people not doing well.
Yeah, I think overall, if we step back and look at social media, the net negative is overwhelming compared to the positive, even from Generation Z themselves, from their own testimony.
Yeah, because in the article here, they talk about, one Gen Zer talks about the breakdown in social institutions as having an impact on them. And we'd say absolutely. So there's probably multiple factors here, but at the very least, social media has had a big impact. And all right, so there's a lot more in this study. I am kind of flipping through page after page after page because I just want to get to the conclusions that they come to at the end of this. Conclusion number one, it's hard to find anyone in Gen Z who says that their generation is doing well overall. So in their look at the studies, in their own research and trying to engage Gen Zers, they're finding that most Gen Zers do not think their generation's doing well. That might be a good question to pose to your students, to your kids. Like, what's your assessment of your generation? Okay, finding number two, it's hard to find anyone in Gen Z mounting a strong defense of social media. So that's positive, is that, hey, there's an honesty. They're able to see what it's doing. And, and so I think that is a good step. And we need to understand, of course, that it is having a big impact on them, and then trying to figure out, okay, what are the next steps? One of the things it said under that point, that conclusion, was it says, the core tragedy remains. And I think this has to do with the kind of the mixed results of, hey, I know it's bad, but hey, it also is good. The core tragedy remains. The primary outlets for social connection and expression have moved on to platforms that are designed to addict, distract, and outrage users. So, and one, earlier on, there was one individual who had given some feedback and said, we've lost third spaces in our culture, like places for us to kind of go and hang out and to be able to express yourself or whatever, or to connect. And so it's so much has moved online. But kind of in the breakdown of the culture, you don't have like community centers where people are gathering. Churches are no longer at the center of cities and have become, they used to be these rich places of cultural engagement, neighborhood engagement. Like, so much has moved online for Gen Z. And what we're finding is that that's a net negative.
Which, don't you think that if you hear that as a parent or a youth pastor or a teacher or a grandparent, that's an opportunity. If young people are saying there's nowhere we can go to get away from this, that is an opportunity for us to create places for them to go.
Yeah.
Come here. Come to our home. Because in our home, we have boundaries on this stuff. And we'll put the stuff away and eat dinner and then play a board game. Or come to our church. Because at our church, we don't let young people sit on their phones while we're together. When we gather, we're intentional about looking each other in the eye and having conversation. If you come to my house, as a grandma, saying to your grandkids, grandma's house is different. You can come here and it's different. I'll be the third space. Yeah. I'll be the place. We can create those places that young people really do want, even if they're not going to say it out loud. And this is where you're at as a young person. It's like you're figuring life out, right? They need our help.
Yeah.
And this is an opportunity to help the young people in our lives. Now, this is a Maven Parent podcast, so mostly to parents. This is an opportunity for us to help our own kids. They aren't going to know what's good for them, and they need us desperately to show them what is good for them, even if they don't want it.
Yeah, and that's where we need the courage and conviction to lead. That's why going through something like this is important, because it helps to strengthen our convictions, things that we might just intuitively know.
Yeah.
You don't need studies to know that social media is harming kids or harming your kid.
Yeah.
And but this helps strengthen those convictions so that you have the courage to do something that's going to be unpopular with your kid.
Yeah, you don't need a study to tell you, once you let your kid have a phone and you start noticing you're having less conversations with them, that when they get in the car and you pick them up from school or church or sports and they get on their phones and they're scrolling through social media and the car's quiet because you're not talking. You don't actually need a study to know why that bothers you, but there's studies to help you know why this isn't good for them. And that's why it's important, because it backs up, for those of us who have kids that are old enough to have phones, it backs up our experience of why did the phone seem to cause separation in our relationship. Yeah. And just to say, it might not be just our teenager that is allowing the phone to cause separation in relationship. That might be our problem too. We might be addicted in the same way. I mean, you read this stuff about Generation Z and some of the quotes from the girls saying how it makes you think a certain way about yourself, or it draws you in and then it's hard to put down. I can relate to that. I can totally relate to that, even a woman in my 40s. And so you read this stuff and hopefully it gives you compassion and then encouragement to do what's needed to be done, to lead them the way they need to be led.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a third conclusion. So number one, hard to find any Gen Zers who think their generation's doing well overall. Number two, strong. No one in Gen Z is making a strong defense of social media. And then lastly, social media usage magnifies other problems. And maybe I'll just close with kind of this quote here. And we'll wrap it up. But social media platforms make depressed teens more depressed, insecure teens more prone to body image issues, and teens who have trouble focusing more prone to addiction. All right. And so that, just insight there. Look, if you see your kid not doing well, or you have a kid who is more depressed and insecure, maybe don't let them on social media. Like with those kids needing to even be more protective, and helping them. And I mean, protective in a good sense here, not overprotective, but say, hey, we need to get you off this stuff because you're going to be more prone to this stuff.
Yeah.
But this is what they kind of said in conclusion. In sum, our efforts to find and elicit the views of Gen Z largely confirm our initial concerns, while also suggesting additional avenues for investigation. The kids are not all right, and the combination of smartphones and social media is a major reason why. So I hope that this is helpful for parents to just continue to wake us up. The culture all around us is just presenting to us smartphone ownership, social media usage, that's the norm. And then it shapes us. It just presents to us what the norm is. And so that's supposed to be the norm for me, for you, for your kids. And we just go along with it. And we need to understand that this is having a big impact on our young people. And so we got some homework to do. We've got some steps that we need to take as families. And we need to pray for the Lord to give us courage to help our kids. And this is a long-term battle. There's going to be some short-term fights. with some long-term gains in the lives of your young people.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.